Hey everyone! In our last video we talked about how we could set up our credential variables inside of Terraform so that as we're managing our DevOps platforms and using Terraform to be able to do that, we were going to set up and needed to set up environmental variables and variable sets inside of Terraform so that we could authenticate back to Azure DevOps, to GitHub, and then back to Terraform itself. So in the last video, what we did is we created those secret variable groups, and we started talking about the 3 different variables that we're going to need to be able to authenticate to those platforms. So today what we're going to do is we're going to populate the variable that is going to authenticate back to Terraform itself. So as you remember, we're setting up Terraform to be able to manage all of these components for us. But in order to do that, we also want to be able to use Terraform to manage itself. We're going to create workspaces for all the different products and all the different components that are being used inside of Azure DevOps and GitHub. But at the same time, we're going to use Terraform to do all of that configuration for us. So if we go back and we jump over into Terraform, you'll see that I have all the workspaces that we created in our previous videos. And we created the workspaces for DevOps, our production configuration, and also DevOps NP, so for our non-prod. So we're going to set up those at the same time, communicating to the same singular repo that we created in some previous videos. So if I jump over into the settings of Terraform Cloud, and I'm going to go down into our variable sets. So we created our DevOps prod secrets and our DevOps non-prod secrets. Again, we want those to be separate because we want to make sure that the credentials that are accessible are managing only the components that are needed. So when it comes to Terraform, and that's what we're going to set up as part of this video, we're going to set up the secret that manages Terraform itself. Now, you may not have a production and a non-production Terraform environment. Now, we could set up different organizations for those, but in the past, I usually haven't done that. We just have one environment for Terraform Cloud, one organization that we're paying for in terms of a licensing perspective, and that's what we set up. So we're actually not going to populate that variable in our DevOps non-prod secret variables, but we are going to do that in our production secrets. And I'm going to show you how exactly we do that and why it is we do it that way. So if we go back into our DevOps prod secrets, and what we're going to do in later videos is configure the environment-specific variables. Those are going to be our non-secrets, and those we're going to use Terraform to populate. So more to come as we build those out. But when it comes to our secrets, these are the ones that are sensitive information. We want very few people to know what these are, and ideally nobody would know what these are. So this is the ones that have to get either updated manually, or there's an automated process that's doing this. So there's a lot of great solutions that we've put together that we can actually automate a lot of these credentials so that as they automatically rotate, then you can actually have an automated process that populates this for you, and then nobody needs to see this information. It works great, it's wonderful. However, just for today, what we're going to do is where probably most people are at, and we're just going to populate this information manually. So what we created in the previous video is we created this variable called TFE token, and you'll notice that it's sensitive, so we can't see its value. And then we'll have the category is it's an environment-specific variable. So what we want to cover also as part of this video is why exactly we're doing it that way. And here's the reason why. As we're using Terraform to manage Terraform itself, GitHub, and Azure DevOps, the way Terraform is able to do this is through a mechanism called providers. Terraform publishes in their provider registry all sorts of different providers, ones that they write, third parties write, like Microsoft, AWS, Oracle, GitHub. They write their own providers, and those are essentially the integration points of how we can utilize Terraform to manage the platforms. The providers are what provides all of the power in order to build those integrations for us. So if we go out actually into the Terraform registry, this is the main principal website where we can see all the available providers. And there's also a lot of different things as part of the registry as well, like modules, which we'll cover in separate videos. But if we go down into the providers, you'll see that HashiCorp and Terraform have providers across all the major cloud platforms. And then there's also a whole slew of other providers, and you can even create your own in order to integrate with other application that you need. What's great is Azure DevOps and GitHub and Terraform already have out-of-box providers. Microsoft building the ADO and GitHub one. It's open source, it's free. You can actually see a lot of the development going on in GitHub. It's wonderful. And then HashiCorp itself builds its own provider that is used to manage Terraform. So if we go inside of the providers, what I'm going to do is take a look at the HashiCorp platform, and the provider that we want to look at is HCP Terraform. So this used to be called Terraform Cloud, now called HCP Terraform. That's the one that we want. So we'll see this is the TFE provider. This is actually the official one built by HashiCorp itself. And this is what we are going to use to provision Terraform with Terraform. That's exactly what we want. This is the provider that essentially we're going to use as we build out those configurations. So the reason I'm bringing you here is why is this important? So if we go inside of the TFE provider, which will be our friend as we are building these out, and we go into the documentation, what's wonderful about HashiCorp's documentation is it goes through the provider. This is going to give you all the information you need in terms of how to create the various resources, how to create the various data sources, what are all the parameters that you need, what is supported as part of this provider, because as we get into the really deep nuances of some of the providers of ADO and GitHub, we're going to find that while it covers most everything, there are some resources that we still can't create as part of this provider. So it's really important to be always checking the docs. I always recommend following the repos. We can cover that in a separate video of following the code repositories of where these providers live, because it's going to give you wonderful insights in what's new. You always want to be following what's new with these providers, because a lot of times things that aren't supported then later get supported, and then now you can start to add that as part of your configurations. But I'm bringing you here today because on the initial documentation page, you're going to see the authentication section. It's going to tell you right off the bat, how do I authenticate to this provider? Where do I go? How does this work? So what you'll notice is there's always a couple ways where you can set the token argument within the provider, meaning when we write our code, we can put this token argument and we can set the value there. Well, we don't want to do that. We don't want to set a token inside of our source code and put that into code. We don't want to do that. But what we do want to do is set this environment variable. So essentially what this means is when Terraform is running on whatever system it's on, it will have access to the environment variables. And if it finds an environment variable with this value, then what it's going to do is use that as its authentication mechanism to authenticate to the provider. So now if we jump back into our DevOps prod secrets, you'll see that here we have our TFE token that's set as sensitive, and it's that same value here, TFE token, and it's set as an environment variable. So that is why we set that name. I didn't make this name up. It comes straight from the provider, and also why we make it an environment variable so that we can always make sure it's set there when we're running on the agent, whether that's a cloud agent as part of Terraform or it's an on-prem agent, which is what we will be setting up in the future, because on-prem agents are going to be able to pass conditional access. So what we're going to set up in the future is we want a wall Azure DevOps and GitHub behind conditional access policies, so you can only access it from on-prem networks. It's just going to isolate all of that traffic because, again, DevOps platforms are very sensitive environments. We want to protect that. So when it comes to how can Terraform access that, the best way is using an on-prem agent. So this is where we get the name TFE token, and we can see that this is the category. It's an environment-specific variable. So how do we populate that? The point of the video. So what we're going to do is how Terraform can do this is we can set, we'll actually go back to the docs, and we'll see that what this is essentially looking for is a token. So you can see the provider requires an Enterprise API token. So to manage the full selection of resources, provide a user token from the account with appropriate permissions. Hold on. So let's take a look at that. So what I'm going to do inside of the settings, you have to be an owner to see all of these settings. You need to be an owner as part of your Terraform org. I'm going to go to API tokens, and you'll see we have 4 specific token types. We have an org across the entire organization, which we can manage the team membership, and workspaces. Seems something like we would want to do. Then there's the concept of team tokens, so team-specific tokens and whatever access the team has. But what the doc is telling us is provide a user token with the appropriate permissions. So if I go to user token, we'll see that this has the same permission level as your account. So if the only token which can be granted across multiple orgs. Okay, let's go back to that. This user should belong to the owner's team of every org you wish to manage. Okay, so if we go back and we look at how Terraform works, when we connect our Terraform org and we set up single sign-on over into Entra ID or whatever your single sign-on or whatever your platform is for managing user, your IAM platform, is when you do that and you connect those accounts, you still have to create a HashiCorp account. You still have to create one, and essentially that is a separate account that gets linked to your, in our case, Entra ID account. What that means is this account still actually exists, and you actually have the ability to log into your HashiCorp account, that it just in case there's an issue with Entra ID. That's good from a break glass perspective, but it is not good from the perspective of now we have to make sure we are walling and protecting that account, making sure we're enabling 2FA and all these other security things which we'll talk about in the future. So when this says provide a user token with an account, appropriate permissions, the user should belong to the owner's team of every org you wish to manage. Okay, so in a lot of scenarios, there's only one org. And we don't want the token spanning across multiple orgs. There's only one org. So you'll see, alternatively, you can use an org or team token instead of a user token, but it will limit which resources you can manage. All right, so what am I limiting? Organization and team tokens cannot manage resources across multiple orgs. Well, I don't want to do that. And org tokens cannot manage certain resource types like SSH keys. So a lot of the things that we're doing here, we're not setting up SSH keys. So actually the one that we typically use are the organization tokens. So if I come in here, I'm not going to create a user token. That's not what I want. I'm going to create an org token. Now, this step is pretty easy. So really it's all about the details of why we're doing this. So what I'm going to do is just generate this token. And for now is you can set whatever the expiration you want this to be. I would recommend something like a custom, maybe in 6 months. Whatever it is that you're going to know to rotate those tokens, whatever your policy is for your org. I'm just going to set this with no expiration date for now. And you'll see we recommend to set an expiration date. Yeah, no expiration is a bad idea. So what I'm going to do is just 90 days just for the sake of this video. I think what I would probably most likely do is set something for 3 to 6 months and set it that way. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to set it for 90 days. I'm going to generate this token. Hey, thanks. Gives me a nice copy button. I'm going to take that and we'll refresh our page. Make sure this refreshes. Great. I can no longer see this token nor copy it. Now I'm going to go back into our variable sets. I'm going to go into our DevOps prod secrets. Let's take a look at, actually we need to edit this at the top. So one of the other things that I want to mention before I paste this is this prioritize variables in this set. Provide any other variable values. Override any other variable values, even if the other variable has more specific scope. So again, we talked a little bit about this in the previous video, that where you set variables, just like in any other platform, you can set variables in all sorts of different locations. So those scopes of where it starts to read those variables, if they have different values and the same name. But when by setting this to prioritize this, that makes sure that this takes precedence no matter the scope. So even if another variable with that same name is set at a more privileged scope, it doesn't matter. This checkbox is wonderful. You want it checked because now I know that nobody intentionally or accidentally is trying to manipulate these secrets with these values. It will always get overlaid with the value that I have set here. So all I'm simply going to do is hit edit this variable. It's TFE token. It's an environment variable. Sensitive. I'm just going to paste that guy in and save. Save down below. I'll save my variable set just to be sure there. And now it's updated. So if we go back into or look at all of our variables here, that's how we set the TFE token. That's why we set it the way we do, and that's why the name is set the way it is. So what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to populate the next one of these secrets. So what we're going to populate is the ARM client secret, where that comes from, and what that authenticates to. So if you're using Terraform and you're using that to manage Azure DevOps, or you're using Terraform to manage Terraform itself, we'd love to hear your feedback. Are you using an API token? Are you using an org token, a user token? Why? Do you have multiple organizations that you are managing? Do you have a non-prod and a prod organization? We'd love to hear your feedback. So leave a comment down below, like this video, and subscribe to our channel as we kind of walk through building out this DevOps platform that we can manage holistically from end to end. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next video.